Dude doesn't get that D&D is not an MMO. I had a whole falling out with a player who constantly got mad at the CR of encounters and got mad at me for undermining the frontliners as a whisper bard with a melee build and wasting my inspiration to use psychic blades instead of buffing the frontliners. The player eventually got kicked for not paying attention and general bad behavior / attitude, so his lack of ability / interest in adjusting was certainly not isolated. Anyway, he was really into FFXIV. I had never played it, nor had interest in it. Later, I started playing a bit and realized how the class and raid system worked. I didn't super enjoy it and I stopped. Months later, I realized this guy was mad at me for being a support class trying to DPS. Very silly. Anyway, the game after he left was plenty fun, and we mostly handled the encounters the DM threw at us with few issues. Because the DM had never made us run down every single enemy or punished us for not having the right ratio of support / DPS / tanks. Sketchy neckbeard turned single player RP into catgirl creepfest. A few years back, I put out a call for players on FB and got a bunch of replies from people who wanted to play but had a hard time finding a DM. Perfect, I thought. The player numbers started to wind down while figuring out scheduling, as is expected. But I had one player who really wanted to play the game but couldn't make scheduling work, so he suggested an asynchronous single player game. Sounded easy enough, I could reply on my own time. So why not? Now I know why not. So I'm a young woman, was in my mid-20s at the time. And this player was a guy I met at an AninCon who seemed friendly enough. I hate to call that alone a red flag, but in hindsight, it kinda was. I tell him the basic premise, it's RPFQ's D&D 5e, but with themes of cosmic horror. In a homebrew setting, weird portals are opening up around the starter town, and he has to figure out how to close them before anything too dangerous gets through. Since he was playing by himself, instead of with a full party, I told him that I'd fill the setting with different NPCs he could recruit for his adventures. His first question, can I build relationships with the NPCs? I replied that of course you can, it's an RP heavy game. And your actions and conversations can get NPCs to like / trust you more. No, I mean romantic relationships. I raised an eyebrow and said that some NPCs could possibly respond to romantic gestures depending on the character and how it's role played. I generally don't have an issue with PC-PC or PC-NPC relationships, after all, but they're not the main focus by any means. You're okay with adult content, right? I immediately saw where this was heading and told him this may not be the kind of RPG he's looking for. This was a magic adventure RPG, not a dating sim. He insisted he was just asking out of curiosity, then asked a lot of questions about NPC appearances, including if any were anthropomorphic and how old they were, pretty much alluding to are they hot / cat girls and legal? At least I hope that adult age is the answer he was looking for. I blocked him on Discord and FB. I'm glad I shut him down fast and that he showed his true intentions before we actually started playing. The other group that I'm running the game for, they've been playing for 4 years, now are getting into high levels of play and uncovering the deeper plot points I set up. Have become good friends, and 2 of them are getting married later this month. I can only imagine how the creep would have derailed this wonderful group with his catgirl spank bank goals. I just go home. I love this sub, but I've played with the same PPL for 30 years, so I've no horror stories. Or so I thought. I've just remembered an acquaintance of mine begs me to run some mutants and masterminds for them. I asked the players who their favorite superheroes were, whipped up a session, and I was ready to go. Players are expressway versions of Thor, the Doctor and the Invisible Women. Skipping to the good part. Me, the speech is caught short by a large explosion and a shout of powers out. Humans first. Rings out. People are screaming, the crowd begins to panic. What do? Thor. I fly up and try to shout to the crowd to stay calm while also scanning for the person who may have been the bomber. The Invisible Woman. I use force fields to protect who I can from falling debris. The Doctor IDK. I just go home. Me. Oh, you're going home to research the bomber or? The Doctor. Nope. Just gonna go home. Me, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not sure what to do with that. The doctor, shrug. Me, do you not want to play? The doctor, not really. And that was it. Game lasted 4 minutes. Still not sure what the hell that was. Player needs to be center of attention, but can't talk to anyone. They're a player in our group that loves to roleplay, but only if it involves her. No one else seems to be able to have their own moments. Anytime we meet new NPCs or get near a town, she feels the need to be the first to interact with them. But never does it well. She also doesn't care about anyone else. If it's not about her, she'll play with her pets. Or play with minis like dolls, or be on her phone. She never pays attention during combat. See, she made an animal. As in, she made a character who doesn't talk, can't read or write, and doesn't understand how to interact with people or civilization. Another of our group's characters has to babysit her constantly, so she doesn't do anything too horrible. She hoards magic items because shiny. Anytime we get close to a town, she decides to transform into some predatory animal and run through it to cause as much panic as possible. Or in meeting an NPC, she'll throw rocks at them. In a dozen sessions, I haven't wanted to interact with her once. The only person in our party who interacts with her is the person who has to babysit her. No one else really cares about her. And she doesn't belong in our party. Even in her own character, she doesn't actually have a justification for staying with us beyond just following us around. She doesn't know anything about any of the other characters in the party, and she doesn't bother to pay any attention to us. And the sad thing is, she's safe from any danger because the DM is her boyfriend, so he gives her plot armor. No matter how bad she acts, there's never consequences. She should be in jail by now, but everyone just seems to ignore her antics, because if she doesn't get her way, she becomes really whinny and cold towards everyone else. And it's not like we can drop her or the game, because several of us live together, and that would spark a tantrum to end all tantrums. It's gotten so bad that I've plotted her death dozens of times. No enemy will attack her, and no NPC will get rid of her. So one of us would have to do it. But God, would that release a demon? I'm sorry, this turned more into venting than I intended. Just a symptom of a bad player and bad DM holding the rest of us hostage with no easy way out. I'll try to rest now, and I'll try to answer any questions, if people have them. Tell the DM what you actually want. Here's a short one with a happy ending I just remembered. I had a player who was new to the game. So as I always like to do, I was helping him build his first PC, as D&D can be rather counterintuitive at times, and I have seen a lot of new players regret their PCs and beg for death. We did not get very far on this one. I want to be a werewolf. I explained to him this was not going to happen as werewolves are immune to non-magical damage and passively regain health, which... no. This made him want it more, so I told him that no, and besides, lycanthropy turns you into an evil madman in my world. He got mad at me, and tried to prove I was a bad DM with list articles he found on some BuzzFeed-like website. He kept yelling at me for like a week, showing me all kind of broke homebrew, and insisting it was balanced, while complaining about variant rules I wasn't even using. I told him that, if he wanted, he could play a barbarian flavored as a werewolf from the Elder Scrolls plane shifted in, or a warden brought in with those same rules. But he kept yelling about how he had to be a werewolf, and that it was my job. After about a week he finally gave up and said, but he mostly just wanted the body. He just wanted to be a humanoid canine who could walk fine on 2 legs or 4. This was not an issue. It never was. I explained to him that I already had a custom race system and a race of canine-like people that I had already approved, and that kobolds already walk that way, which is odd but okay. Finally he was happy. We have not had any more issues. But like I said, I told him several times some things he could have, but because he never told me what he was actually looking for, I was unable to help him. Just kicked out a player from our group. We just recently kicked out a player for a number of reasons. They are very flaky with attendance. This problem ramped up recently, but it has been an issue for a while now. The last straw was last week, when they said in the morning that they'd be there, and when it came to game time they decided otherwise. Sometimes when they do show up they'll want to leave the session an hour early, and they get offended when we decide we want to keep playing. They don't pay attention in game, unless the story is focused on them. For this point I do have sympathy since they do have ADHD. But it became disruptive especially in combat, when they take 10 minutes on their turn. Not to mention unfair to RDM. They'll randomly go on 15-minute tangents and anecdotes in the middle of the game. They never level up at the same time as the rest of the party at the end of the session. And instead level up during the start of the next session, while we've already started, disrupting the game. They are very sensitive. We all talked about it, and agreed that we felt like walking around eggshells whenever we talked to them. We made a group chat and talked about it and thought it was best for them to be removed. None of us dislike them as a person, which is why it took us so long to kick them out, I think. No one wanted to be that guy. Rule proposal: write considerately. Long rune paragraphs, uninterrupted stream of consciousness meltdowns, and posts with mounds of irrelevant details / convoluted aliases are not reader friendly. If your authorial voice sounds like it desperately needs to use the bathroom at a large amusement park with no maps. Hey, I get it, that's what rough drafts are for. Just get the ideas down on paper. But there is no time pressure to hit the submit button. You don't have to send in the unedited blob of thoughts. There's no reason to submit anything written in that fashion if you care about readability. Caring about readability refers to having a modicum of consideration about the people you want to read your submission. If you can't be bothered to give a shit about the audience, namely, your peers on this sub, I don't think you're a positive addition to the community. I think the subreddit should have stronger rules against these types of inconsiderate posts existing. Underscore 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 underscore. And frankly, your decision to not even try to communicate helpfully is not a good trait for someone who wants to participate in a collaborative game like D&D. If you insist on posting like a neurotic telegram operator on an airplane about to crash into the Titanic, yeah, you probably are the bad guy. And entirely for reasons under your control. A pain many of you will feel. I've been DMing for a Pathfinder group for about 4 years now. Since solidly before the lockdowns. Frequency has varied, but usually every week or every other week. We started at level 4 and are currently level 16. We have grown from trudging across the rural countryside in a wagon to scouring the depths of literal hell with that same wagon. It's been places, man. We have built up stories, plots, characters. We have numerous running gags. A player that had to step away has returned for the final stretch. I have plans for the conclusion of many plotlines, literally about to happen. I have a big thing ready to go involving a gag from the entire campaign long and a false hydra. They are literally on the verge of bargaining with Asmodeus and killing a god. Over the past year, scheduling conflicts have increased. Players have started ghosting on sessions and apologizing after for oversleeping or something. Quite a bit of talk, but session after session gets called off. I'll claim next session happens even with only one of you. Then the one who does show never signs on because no one else says they are ready. It feels like some have lost interest, and others have lost availability, and all have lost accountability. We haven't played in months. I've actually given up at this point. I've stopped asking. It pains me. We were this close. I could wrap this whole campaign up in 34 sessions. And I've told them this. Then, nothing. I know it's not as dramatic as a lot of the stories on here. But in my eyes it's a very real and very relatable horror. Guess I just needed to vent. Self-proclaimed optimized healer forgets to heal, leading to my character's death. So I'm on a server with about a dozen friends or so, all of whom play D&D. We run several games with different DMs and players on different days. Most of us are pretty friendly, but one of my friends added in a new guy, a friend of his, Zane. I played with him in one other game, but scheduling meant we hadn't really interacted much, so I didn't know what he was like as a player. So when a friend, Charlie, expressed a desire to start DMing, we all thought it would be cool to invite Zane. His first character set off a few red flags, which Charlie and I discussed between sessions. A homebrew race of Zane's own design that got natural armor, fire resistance, poison immunity, and a terribly wooded innate spellcasting that implied he had cure wounds at will. I warned Charlie there could be some balance issues, but thankfully there ended up not being many owing to Zane playing dangerously and dying a few sessions in. His next character was a reborn healer, which consisted of 1 life cleric and 4 alchemist, which he had optimized to never let anyone die again, a sentiment Charlie agreed with, since he was still new to encounter balance. For a while it was all fine and dandy, but I did notice Zane rarely used healing spells, or in fact any features besides inflict wounds. And when the wizard got a fun boon to cast some druid spells, he ended up healing significantly more. This, in conjunction Zane's insistence to keep going into melee despite having very little survivability, meant the marshals were often frustrated when they were injured and in need of healing. This all came to a head last session, where Charlie threw us up against a nasty monster with the ability to create areas where you couldn't move until someone pulled you out, and had the capability to do large amounts of ranged damage. As a rogue, I hid and started shooting the enemy, while the rest of the party, including our melee fighter Evan, were unable to move and started getting whittled down every turn. Evan tried to persuade Zane to drag him out, which the DM said could break the effect and was only 5 feet away, while Zane kept doing nothing besides cast Chill Touch every turn. Eventually I needed to take a shot that left me exposed, which led to a failed dex save knocking me down, which would have been all well and good, but despite my pleads Zane kept using Chill Touch. 3 failed death saves later, we realized Zane had been incredibly quiet, so when we listened we heard snoring. He'd fallen asleep. Naturally we weren't very pleased, but by now it was the end of the session. We haven't talked yet, but the next session is tonight, and I'm wondering how he's gonna explain himself.